Hello.
Why, hello there. I didn't realize you were calling me.
Welcome to Queer Cinema Podcast. I'm Joe.
That was incorrect. Queer Cinema Podcast? Excuse me?
The dynamic of our relationship is I say things incorrectly and Allison
Yells.
yes.
That's exactly right.
Because it's the best way I respond to things. This is Queer Cinema Catchup, a movie podcast where we talk about queer-related themes
And movies.
in movies. And there's no better people than us to do that because Allison and I have a history together.
We do. A long history. It began in 2000. Well, wait. It didn't begin in 2006. It almost ended in 2006 when I moved away. But prior to 2006, we were neighbors and we were at each other's houses all the time. Or more likely, I was at Joe's house all the time. And me and Joe and his sisters were making these little movies because we loved movies. And honestly, it was kind of Joe and I who kept insisting that we continue to do this as everyone else began to grow up and be like, can we stop playing pretend, please?
We were
And I was like, no, no, we cannot. I think at the time I wanted to be an actor. I'm going to imagine that that's what was going on for me. But anyway.
And I like to be controlling and tell everyone what to do.
I want to be the star and you wanted to control.
But now here we are 20 plus years later in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, attempting to achieve our dreams. And
Roomies.
as we found out when we first moved in with each other, we are both queer ourselves without even realizing it.
It's amazing. It's a story that feels so rare and extraordinary to us, but probably isn't all that rare for two queer kids who found the ability to express themselves in film, wound up moving to Los Angeles in their 20s.
There's a podcast that pops up on TikTok every now and then of these two guys. They have a podcast together and they were best friends growing up.
Aww.
And they both were closeted and like came out to each other later in life. And I think they're
beautiful.
also in LA.
I saw something. Who was it? Some actor was talking about their best friend. Okay, this really isn't a very interesting story because I don't remember the details, but I think it's a very common story, but it feels special to us. So that's why we decided to make a podcast.
Well, speaking of famous people, I was at Sundance recently
True.
for Slam Dance, which is not Sundance.
Which we looked up.
Was
weren't
created
sure.
because
Someone got rejected from Sundance, which I think is badass.
yeah, it's badass.
Or to quote one of my favorite people, metal as hell.
Oh, who said that?
Taylor Swift said it in a Time magazine article, which I kind of think is a little silly, but it's fun to say. So metal as hell.
Nice. But while I was at Sundance / Slam Dance, I had the opportunity to go to the premiere of the queer movie Love Lies Bleeding. And
Jealous.
after the movie, I'm going to get really close so nobody else can hear. Oh, I forgot you don't have headphones on. It's really cool when you have headphones on. It's like an ASMR experience. So I'll speak louder. I saw, she came out on stage with the whole cast of characters, but I told Allison before I left for Sundance that I wanted to see Kristen Stewart with my own eyes because she does live relatively near to us.
Behind
and
a gate.
She is looking to collaborate with up-and-coming filmmakers. I am an editor. Please collaborate with me.
Okay. Side note.
Oh, yeah.
I saw an interview that Kristen Stewart gave before Sundance and how she said
Yeah.
she was looking to collaborate with young filmmakers.
I forgot.
And then I told you that. And I said, you have to find Kristen Stewart. And then you said you wanted to set eyes on her. So once again, repeat the dynamic of me yelling at you. Continue.
I like taking credit for everything. So yes, Allison told me that tidbit of information. And then I went with the running joke because I also wanted to see the movie Love Lies Bleeding because they had an amazing trailer for that movie. They got me really excited for it. I was like, I'd love to see that movie. It was something I was most excited for. I was going to get a ticket for it. But as I didn't buy tickets in advance, everything was sold out.
Sad.
But somehow miraculously, I just happened to be on the app when someone deleted their ticket to the movie. So I got in, I got to see it. The movie experience was incredible. And the actors and the director came out and spoke afterwards. And it was a very like uncomfortable situation. I don't really know how to describe it. It was like the energy of the room, like it wasn't just like your traditional like fan base in the audience. Like it was like, it just felt like there were all these like critics in the audience. And so I think that the director, Rose Glass, and all the cast kind of felt like uncomfortable. It was also like this giant, it's at the Eccles Theater in Park City. And I think everyone was kind of like nervous to interact with the audience or say anything. And the most memorable part is Dave Franco appeared to be giving like a really genuine answer to a question about how like he got into his character. In the movie, he's just kind of like the archetype abusive husband character. Like it was just very like one-sided, which is fine. It was like part of the role, but he was like, yeah, I was talking with Rose before we were shooting and like she told me like get it inside his head. Like what was his life as a child? Like he probably himself had like a really like hard upbringing, and it's just kind of comical because if you see the movie, like Dave Franco's character is like very one note and he's not really anything beyond that. And so as Dave Franco's giving like what appears to be this very genuine answer, Kristen Stewart like grabs her mic and she's just like, man, shut the fuck up. And it was just like so shocking, but exciting at the same time.
I feel like that just encapsulates the Kristen Stewart vibe. She's pretty quirky. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I
or
guess
not quirky. Like, I feel like when she was younger, she was so like awkward and introverted, and now she kind of owns her offbeat vibe in a way that's very like commanding and cool. But I think like that sort of offbeatness is still within her.
Yeah.
So maybe that has to do with timing.
I myself would love to hone that kind of power because then Sundance was also a lot of networking and interacting with people. And man, just cold networking can be challenging sometimes.
But hey.
I did it.
And he exchanged a business card.
One of my 100 business cards. As much as I would love to just continue rambling on about my Sundance/Slam Dance experience, today we actually are going to be talking about the movie All of Us Strangers.
Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should.
I've always felt like a stranger in my own family.
Maybe I didn't love you
You're always scared of something.
quite as often as I could.
Always running away. Do you remember?
Little things I should have said and done.
Sorry I never came in your room when you were crying.
I never took the time.
It's funny, it doesn't take much
You were always on my mind.
to make you feel the way you felt. Back there again.
An incredible film.
Yes. Now, Allison and I, like Naiad, we watched this movie separately.
Yeah, which is unusual. I feel like it's not going to be the case for most of the movies that we're talking about on
Yeah.
here.
So this is like, for these first two episodes, it's kind of rare that we aren't watching the movie together, but
Although maybe that would be
it gives like a
interesting-
different perspective because it's interesting because Naiad, you saw first, recommended it to me,
You're so right.
and then I saw All of Us Strangers, recommended it to you.
Although I was going to see that because it's like the way the trailer is with like the way you can the past is bleeding into the present. Like that's totally my jam.
Naiad's a very uplifting, hopeful movie about two women who were once lovers, and even though they don't have a sexual relationship anymore, they still very much have a long-lasting friendship. All of Us Strangers, and again, there's going to be spoilers in all these episodes.
Lots. This is a very, if you don't want this experience, there's lots of surprises in this movie.
Lots of
so
surprises.
you will be spoiled. Okay.
All of Us Strangers is a very sad film about two men coming together and having a very sexual relationship, only for it to end in tragedy in multiple ways.
Yeah. So I think like maybe it'd be important to describe the premise, which I think is very unique.
Yeah.
It centers around a character played by Andrew Scott of Sherlock fame and, of Hot Priest fame. That's probably way more relevant in this day and age. Can't believe I failed to reference it. And Paul Mescal of, he's so
After
famous.
Sun.
What would you say is his most famous role?
Wait, what is his most famous role?
Oh, it's probably Normal People.
Oh, I never saw that. And I never saw After Sun.
After Sun is very similar to this movie in the way it will make you feel.
Okay.
Depressed.
But it's really interesting because All of Us Strangers, and we're still trying to figure out the format of this podcast. So please chime in. I don't know if people on podcasts can comment, but if you have like thoughts on like what you don't like, we're very open to constructive criticism.
I think what we should do is, this is what a lot of podcasts do, is set up an email account for this so that people can email, then we can read their emails if they're like raising interesting points about the movies that we're watching and we can chat about it. The Ringer podcast does that for their TV series things and I love that. So that's what we should do.
So the email, we don't have it as we're recording this, but I'm sure it will be in the footnotes of the episode once this launches. Share your thoughts on like what's working, what's not working, and we will try to
or thoughts
adjust
about the movies we're watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it centers around a character called Adam, played by Andrew Scott, and some younger versions of him. But it opens with him living in a new apartment building in London that's pretty vacant, and the fire alarm is going off, and he leaves the apartment and then looks up and sees like another tenant in this pretty deserted building looking out at him, goes back inside. This tenant, played by Paul Mescal, his name is Harry, shows up with like a bottle of alcohol, wants to come in, and it's kind of flirtatious, I guess. But what's called them by the character name? Adam is like, is like a stranger showing up at your door. Interesting title, All of Us Strangers. And he's like, no, like, I don't want you to come in. Closes the door on him. But
I'm sorry if Paul Mescal is it Mescal like the alcohol or Mescal? Like, I don't know how to say his last name.
I don't know either.
If Paul Mescal showed up at my door,
You'd let him in?
yeah. But I guess
But he's a stranger. Like, if a stranger showed up at your door, already seemed drunk, had a bottle of alcohol.
I mean, at the very least, I'd at least like get his number or something like that. I don't know.
Well, that's
But it turns out that
lovely.
they're the only two people in this building.
Correct.
It appears.
Well, possibly. Okay, I just got water on my laptop.
So to finish my thought on the movie, like, yes, it's a very depressing story. I do love depressing stories though. So that's kind of why I recommended it. But also, and we'll talk about it more as we like get to the end, but I also consider it to be a really like hopeful movie. And I like consider it a lot of just the way like the cinematography, how the story was told. I take it more as like metaphorical or like more of like a fable. Like, I mean, it's a ghost. It's a ghost story.
Yeah.
I think you can even interpret like, I don't know. It's like kind of speaking between generations. Like Adam is from like the Gen X, or maybe he's like older millennial generation.
No, I think he's Gen X.
Whereas Paul Mescal is
Gen
Z. And so it's kind of like the interaction between these two different generations. Gen X was dealing with coming to their sexuality like during the AIDS crisis, and it wasn't in like certain countries, like it still wasn't okay to be like identify as gay or bisexual. Like it was still very like difficult and challenging. Whereas we're seeing more with like Gen X. One of those letters. We're seeing more with Gen Z, at the very least, like in America or like more Western countries, how, it's becoming much more accepting and people are much more open, even to like sexualities beyond gay and lesbian. There's just like a huge representation. And I don't know, they're just having it's a different experience as every generation faces different experiences. So it was really interesting to see. With all that said though, all the characters in this movie kind of have a tragic fate to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So, and just to finish, the premise is like that happens. They meet. Meanwhile, Adam, the character, Andrew Scott's character, is a writer, a screenwriter. Biggest laugh in the LA theater happened later on, where someone quipped that writers don't know anything at all about the world, and everyone in the theater laughed hysterically because it probably was a theater full of writers. But anyway, he's writing a screenplay about his past, his family life, which was very tragic in that his parents died before he turned 12. And so in the movie, he's going back to his childhood home, presumably for like research or to get a feel of the place. But then he's actually able to interact with the ghosts of his parents as an adult. And he is older than both of his parents. So it's just like very moving. And to kind of speak to what Joe was just saying, his parents are still trapped in the world of like what the LGBTQ experience was like back then because they passed away and they never experienced what happened next. And so the character Adam gets to have these conversations with his parents about who he is and his life that he never did get to have. So it's kind of part romance, part ghost story in the beginning. And
kind of throughout the movie is a love story in many different ways. But something like interesting behind the scenes is, I don't know how to say, Andrew Haig, the director and writer, they actually filmed in his childhood home.
Yeah.
It kind of like adds like a new level, and without really knowing much, but I think you kind of assume that, Andrew's writing from the perspective of Adam.
Well, actually, I don't think he is queer. Am I wrong about that?
He's married to a man.
Oh, okay. Well, his parents are dead. That's what I meant.
Okay.
It's not exactly accurate,
Yeah.
but it's still very beautiful that he filmed in his childhood home.
And so the story, almost within like the first, there's like a hauntingness to the movie in the very beginning. Like I remember the opening shot really stands out to me is looking at this cityscape, which are they in Ireland or England?
London.
Oh, they're in London?
Yeah.
But they're both from Ireland.
Well, they tried to explain that later on in the movie where the mom is played by Claire Foy and I looked up her character name is just Mom. But anyway, so Claire Foy, or Mum, I should say. Claire Foy says something like, did you go and live with your father's mother, after this after we passed away. And he said, no, I went with your mom to Ireland.
Oh, okay.
So, but she doesn't have an Irish accent. And so I was a little bit, I feel like they put that in there to explain Andrew Scott's Irish accent.
Okay.
But I think they just both sound so beautiful as Irish people that they were like, just use your normal accents.
Yeah, well, it opens with this like striking image. You like see this cityscape, and then the camera rack focuses, and you were actually like looking at the glass window pane of Adam's room, and it focuses on Adam, and he's staring out at the city. The sun's either rising or setting. There's like this warm glow over him, so it already looks kind of like haunting in a way. And then the fire alarm goes off. Adam's the only person that appears to need to exit the building, and he looks up, and you see who's the other guy? Harry.
Yeah.
You see Harry looking down at him from another window. It's all already kind of strange. Like it feels very like alienating already. And then, as Allison mentioned, when Adam goes back to his room, Harry appears with a bottle of alcohol, appears really drunk, and Adam turns him away. And then is it like already in the next scene, he's taking the train to his like childhood home.
Well, you see him like writing, and then he's on the way.
And then he's on the way, and like it clicked pretty fast for me. I'd be interested to hear your perspective, but like as soon as he like meets his parents, like, wow, your parents are the same age, if not younger than you. They're already dead. And it wasn't like shocking or a twist. It's kind of, I just like accepted that information immediately. How did you see it?
Well, I knew the premise.
Oh, okay.
I saw the trailer, and I knew that he'd be talking to his
they
deceased parents.
They reveal that in the trailer.
I mean, it wasn't like explicitly stated. Well, no, I think there's the moment where he says, my parents died in a car crash before I was 12. So yes, I knew that. So I was like, all right, when are the parents coming?
And the actors that play the parents were probably, I'll say I watched this movie in a movie theater by myself with an audience. And I like, for a majority of the movie, I like could not see the screen because there were like tears like swelling up in my eyes. Like I just was like, so there was just like a heaviness to this movie that just felt really like powerful and authentic. And sometimes like I would get really emotional just because of how beautifully represented and like authentic the mom and dad were, and Adam, and coming to terms with the death of his parents and his own sexuality at the same time, and their acceptance or not acceptance of who he is. So I think it was like doing a lot, but I thought it like really accomplished all of it really well.
Yeah, and what I like about the premise, it's like, you know, because his parents died at that age, right? Before, probably when he was just beginning to understand himself and his own difference. It's like, to have them die, he never got to have these conversations. And so all he could do in his entire life is imagine what they would have said.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the movie wants us to say that these are not imagined conversations because these are real ghosts. And we'll get more into that later on. But yeah, it's just like a really interesting way to explore that generational divide because like it puts a really stark timestamp on it. The fact that he wasn't able to come out to his parents before they died and then didn't get to see them perhaps evolve with the times because they passed away. So it kind of really puts all that into sharp relief in a way that's really fascinating and well done.
And so when Adam first interacts with his parents, I forget, like mom is like preparing like lunch or something like that. And they kind of catch up. Are both parents there, right?
Yeah.
He like goes back home to his house back in London. And the whole movie is kind of like bouncing between his relationship with Harry, like Bloom in London, and then him like opening up to his parents, like catching them up on his life at his childhood home. And then it's like kind of bouncing back and forth between there. There's like some very beautiful moments between the parents and Harry.
One thing I was curious to hear your thoughts on. So yeah, he goes back, he meets his parents together, and then they say something like, oh, you should come back. We might not both, like, you know, your dad might be away or like, but one of us will be here.
Yeah.
And then they have these two scenes where he gets to return and basically come out to his parents separately.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it was very effective because to see the two different responses that they have and to kind of learn more about his past. But also, I wondered, it made it very like emotionally compartmentalized. Because in reality, a family is a unit, right? Like it wouldn't happen like that, most likely.
I mean, I came out to my parents individually.
Oh, I guess so did I. But I guess like it's like you don't get to have where you're just focusing on one relationship. Do you know what I mean? Like because you're in a relationship with your whole family.
Yeah. When he does come out to each parent separately, he comes out to his mom. They're sitting in the kitchen. Is that right?
Yeah, and she's making food or like food and tea.
And then it's kind of like her catching like, it like must be so hard for you. Like, and what about starts talking about like AIDS, and he's
That
like, well,
disease is what she says.
and then he's like, well, things are like much different now. I was kind of just like surprised how she wasn't like immediately accepting of it, but she also wasn't shutting it down. She was just kind of like processing it.
She was like shocked and kind of a little cold, I'd say.
Claire,
She was so
she was
good.
like so good at that movie. And really the dad character too, like he like did a really
Jamie Bell.
Jamie Bell like had a challenging role to play too, because then Adam goes back to London. He goes back to London. Is that when he has sex with Paul for the first time?
So I'm kind of forgetting how I think that's right. I think, I forget how they kind of like reconnect, but this time Adam is more willing to let him into his life a little bit. And then they just kind of have this conversation about how Harry's character, moved away from his family and he feels disconnected from them because even though they're accepting, he just thinks like his siblings have had children and like he feels like he's on the edge of the family unit, and you just like get this really strong sense of loneliness from this guy.
Yeah.
And I feel like the two of them kind of connect because Adam is also exploring this like loneliness and the impact of losing his family at a young age.
Yeah. Similarities and differences in what they experience, but they're both feeling this like sense of loneliness that is heightened again by them being the only two in this giant apartment complex. But it was really interesting, like in the bedroom scene between them, which I guess was a bedroom scene because they were on the couch in the
couch scene.
The couch scene. There's something like, I don't know if it's just like Paul Mescal, what he brings to it. I just felt like a real like confidence in him where like Andrew Scott's character is like a little more like reserved and nervous. So then after they have sex and they're like opening up to each other in the bedroom, I thought it was really interesting how Harry has like such like how he talked about his backstory and feeling so closed off from his family, because just like the confidence that it just shows that your confidence in the bedroom does not lead to confidence in the real world. You shouldn't have those two together. But that was like kind of like a surprising thing to hear.
So it does highlight that there's like this generational difference between coming into queer identity in the 80s during a time of intense discrimination and great fear because of AIDS, and coming into your identity as a Gen Z person where like LGBTQ people are so much more visible. There's so many different types of identities and it's much more accepted, although we should, obviously acknowledge that a lot of legislation is attempting to push back against that, and especially for trans people, how it might be even, well, I don't want to say more difficult, but there's just definitely a lot of like difficulties now. But regardless, there's at least more visibility and acceptance than there was back then.
Mm-hmm.
But how even if, a minority identity is more normalized, like we still live in an unequal world and there's still these like minority stressors, and you can feel like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to do these things, but I'm still like on the outside looking in, and it gets better, but how much better is it really? You know what I'm saying?
Like you have more acceptance within yourself and the world or your country, but there's still like dynamics, like the family dynamics between your family and extended family. There's always something, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like interesting to like hear that. I just like felt like every time that Adam was returning back to London, I kind of like felt like a weight was like lifted off my chest. Like I felt like relieved, like, okay, he's like gonna see Harry and there'll be like some beautiful like a romance story here. But then every time it was like he was diving back into his like childhood, going back to his childhood home, like I just was like, okay, like how is this movie gonna destroy me even more? So I was really curious to see after like the really well done Claire Foy scene, I was like, how is it gonna go down with Jamie Bell? And that was just like beautifully crafted in just like another way. Like the dad like come to, like he mentions that at times he heard his son like crying in his room, and then Adam reveals that he was like crying in his room because he was being bullied at school. And the dad says a line about how, I don't know how to feel about this because if I were like a kid at school, I probably would have been one of those people bullying you.
I think Adam also said like, I didn't tell you what was going on because the comments you had made at home, like I just thought like if I were to share the situation, you would see what everyone else sees, and you already did see it, and I know you wouldn't like it too, which felt really real too.
And then is it in that scene where the dad said like apologizes and said like,
yes.
I'm sorry, I never,
Yeah.
So that, God.
He says, I'm sorry, I never came into your room when you were crying.
Yeah, I
think so.
There's a really funny moment. I was watching this movie.
Okay, we have to talk about this because, okay, go ahead, you first.
and Adam has a line where he's like, you're the one who always made me feel self-conscious and tell me not to cross my legs like a girl. And I was like, oh God, like I'm crossing my legs in this movie. And I felt like really like self-conscious. I was like, well, I can't just like uncross my legs and make it appear that I internalizing this way too much. And then so I waited for like 20 minutes before like I think I did eventually cross my legs, but then I crossed them the other way. So I kept my legs crossed the entire time.
I'm sure you weren't probably the only person in the theater
Yeah,
who
if I
was
look-
experiencing
if I looked
something
around.
similar. But one thing I found interesting to compare and contrast the Claire Foy scene with the Jamie Bell scene was, so one, the dad says like, oh mom, like he says, did mom tell you? And he said yes. So he has had the chance to like process it himself, and the mom character did not have that chance. But even though like the mom has been portrayed as like very loving and like mom-like very stereotypically like, oh, do you have a jacket? Like, you know, like all that kind of stuff earlier in the movie. I would say that her response was like so cold, and it made me feel like so like bad. Whereas the dad was able to like atone for the past and like really be there for, like, they had this moment that was really moving. So it's kind of the opposite of what my maybe stereotypical assumptions would be, that like the mom scene would be the one that's more loving.
Yes. So then, so after that scene, Adam goes back to London, and the like romance between him and Paul's expanding outside of their lonely apartment complex. They go to a club together.
Yeah. That's when I started to like really, really appreciate the movie, because it was like surreal and well done.
And
Anyway,
you
continue.
didn't really know where it was going. Like, so it kind of like changed. It's like, oh, like they're like in the world. And then I forget how
They take drugs.
they take drugs. Oh,
Yeah,
that's right.
And that's why it's justified the surreal elements. But
And then Adam, I forget if we even see him on the train again. He's like in bed with his mom. Is that right?
so it's Christmas. So his parents died on Christmas Eve.
Oh, that's right.
And he's in his like, and it got a big laugh in my theater. He's in like Christmas onesie pajamas, and everyone kind of, because it looks silly because he's a grown adult male, but he like comes into his parents' room, and the mom's like, "Come on in, you can sleep with us," or whatever. So he's in bed with the mom and the dad, and then go ahead.
So we also skipped then there's a incredible soundtrack, like a lot of like Pet Shop Boys, and then the song The Power of Love, which I forget who the artist is on that, but it has like this incredible soundtrack. The parents are decorating the Christmas tree, and I forget if this happens before.
I think it's all very integrated. Like basically what happens is they go to the club, they're having a great time. They have, what kind of drug do they take?
Molly
Ketamine?
probably, or ecstasy,
Oh.
or maybe they take ketamine.
I mean, I feel like it was a drop. I don't know anything about drugs.
Oh, that's maybe acid then.
That makes sense. I don't know. But anyway, from there, it kind of goes in and out of the club.
The parents are decorating the Christmas tree with Adam, and the Pet Shop Boys song,
Always on My
Always
Mind.
on My Mind is playing. And
But actually, Claire Foy is singing it
Yeah.
to Adam.
Well,
It's almost
she's
like a lull. It's like so beautiful. The way she's looking at
she's
him.
like almost like sheepishly like looking at him. One of the first things I said when I came home after seeing the movie, I was like, in other hands, that could have been really corny. It just like hit me so hard. And the movie's just like kind of like swelling. And I forget if it's like going back to the club or not. But then, yeah, like Adam's in his pajamas and he gets into bed with Claire Foy. And I forget what they even talk about, but I feel like that's where you feel
the love.
the love.
Yes.
Like that we missed out where Claire Foy was really cold in that first scene. Now she's kind of like warmed up to it. And it just feels very like
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
The only thing I'm gonna add is if you listen to the lyrics and like the song itself, if you were to like hear it by the Pet Shop Boys, like it's very like upbeat, but when Claire Foy singing it, it's very like lullaby like, and she sings. The lyrics are, maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should, maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could have. Little things I should have said and done, I just never took the time. You were always on my mind. You were always on my mind. And then it kind of goes along that theme, like maybe I didn't hold you all these lonely times, blah blah blah. But what I really appreciate about that is like she's explaining. It's like almost like a stand-in for, there were these things I could have done and didn't do, kind of like with the dad not going in at night when he was crying. But like that doesn't negate the parental love of how like you were always in my mind and heart, and I was always loving you even when I failed to like express it properly. It's very moving.
And so Adam's in bed with his mom, and they're having like a very like you just like feel the love between them. And then Adam rolls over and Paul's in bed with him. This movie does like incredible like transitions. It's like one of the hardest things to do in editing is like, how do you transition between scenes? And this was there's a lot of scenes in here that were kind of like built in, or they made it feel built in. Like obviously that transition was very built in, but Adam's now in bed with Paul. And I forget, is he like now he's transported back to London?
Yeah, he's basically coming down off of the high and like freaking out because he's like, what happened? Like, where am I? You know, he's like having this moment where he's like waking up alone and scared, but he's not alone because Harry is there.
And then also intermixed with all like the club and him being back at home, there's like the train scene. Right?
Yes, that's like interspersed.
Where, and again, this is all this podcast is just a giant spoiler. So please, if you haven't seen the movie yet, please stop this and watch the movie. Adam is on the train, like
trying to follow Harry, who he sees in the other. Like I kind of interpreted that, like when they're in the club, he like loses sight of Harry. It seems like Harry's going off to hook up with someone else.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, at that moment I had this like big fear, like, oh no, like this, he trusted this guy. It's so hard for him to trust other people.
Yeah.
And now like he's like a shitty guy who's going to go hook up with someone else and leave him alone on drugs.
Yeah.
But then that's counterbalanced by like when they wake up and he's there to support him. But anyway,
I'm pretty sure like in the club, I had the same thought. I was like, oh no, it's going to be a movie of him wanting to be in an open relationship and Adam like not wanting to do that. I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch this. Like, then when they're on the train and Adam can't find Harry, I was like, oh no, it's going to turn out that Harry's been dead this whole time. Or he's like a ghost this whole time.
Which we'll say is what
ends up happening.
I had a thought early in the beginning, knowing the premise, like when he showed up at the apartment, I was like, oh, I bet he's dead. But then the movie convinced me otherwise. So from
the train point on, I was like, in the back of my mind, I was kind of like, I was still like enjoying the movie, but I had that in my head, like Harry's going to be dead. Don't be, mostly as my own protection measure. I'm like, be prepared that this will be a very sad
devastation.
Ending. Yeah. Cause then I forget the conversation that then like as Harry's comforting Adam, I forget what they talk about, if they like,
I don't remember either, but it was moving.
But it's like, it's moving. That's when Adam's like, I want to show you my parents. Like my parents, they're here. I want to show you them.
I don't think he tells. What's awful is like, I want to show you something. And this scene honestly played out like a horror film to me.
Yeah.
I was full of dread and horror. So basically they show up at the parents' house and he's knocking on the door, desperate for his parents to come out to meet Harry. And at this point, the way I was, this is what convinced me that Adam or Harry was alive, was that he was looking at Adam like he had gone insane.
Yeah.
You know, it really seemed like that's what was going on. Like Adam in his like extreme grief was coming to this house, banging on a stranger's door. And then all of a sudden, like through the glass, we can see his parents like staring out, but not coming to the door. And it felt me, it was like chilling. It felt like a gothic horror moment. And Harry looks in, you don't really know what he sees. Now I think he sees the parents and he understands that they're dead and it scares him because he doesn't really realize that he's dead. So he flees and his parents don't let Adam in that time.
So Adam goes back to London?
I think the next day he gets inside.
Okay. And then they go to the diner together.
They go to the diner.
And there was already so many like emotionally devastating scenes, but they're all kind of like heartwarming. Whereas this was kind of like the diner scenes, like the goodbye scene with the parents and the way it's just like shot like in close-ups. And there's like a mid-morning sunlight is shining through the diner. And it's kind of like Adam saying goodbye to his parents. And it's just like all like very devastating, but like beautiful and moving at the same time.
And crucially, he does something really interesting. So at some point he must have told Harry his dad died instantly, but his mother did not. And was taken to the hospital in the ICU all alone. And she had actually lost her eyes, or like had lost an eye. So she couldn't see out of one eye and didn't have an eye. And Adam describes like going back to the scene of the accident to try and find the eye because he felt like it was really important, but instead he just found like a piece of glass or something like that. But anyway, his mom, all of a sudden, like during this conversation, they're kind of starting to like drift into the after life, I guess. And then suddenly she can't see anymore. And he says, I'm like right here, I'm right here. And like he like helps her pass on, I guess. And also like she had asked like, how did we die? Was it quick? And he lies to her. Like he's like, yes, it was instant. Like you don't have to worry. It wasn't painful at all. And I felt like he had almost taken on the role of parent there.
Wow. Somehow, I'm going to be honest, I missed that dialogue.
About the eye?
About the eye. Oh. So then I was so confused when she was like, I just assumed he's like, oh, when you pass on, you just like can't see anymore. But that's so beautiful and like a heartbreaking way that he would say like, no, you like died instantly. Like everything's, taking on the parent. Like it's very well done. I didn't really know like where the story was going after that, but everyone in the movie theater was crying. I forget if Adam like returns to his place and he can't find Harry.
He decides to go visit Harry in his apartment.
And that's where I got so angry at this movie and I felt betrayed. I went from like 100% loving it to 100% despising it because the way it transpired at first is horrible and really pissed me off.
You know what I was thinking during this moment?
What were you thinking?
I was thinking, Joe, I can't believe you made me fucking see this movie. I was so angry as well, but I was blaming you.
What? And why? Like, I mean,
because this is what happens. Okay, he's just come to terms with his parents' death, right? It's beautiful. It's sad. He had to deal with this grief for his entire life, and it has clearly inhibited his ability to live in his own truth fully and to form relationships and connections. That's like a theme that he talks about throughout the film with Harry. And so he's finally come to peace with this, and he goes to the apartment. He goes to Harry's apartment. He smells something horrible. It's a shambles in there. It's very clear that Harry is probably dead. It seemed like we were setting up for Adam to have found peace only to find himself in the exact same cycle and situation all over again. And that made me so upset and angry.
Yes, you've articulated the emotions that I was feeling too. Because I forget if because I did see that he was wearing the same clothes. Like I think the bottle of like alcohol and whatever like t-shirt he was wearing was very distinct, where I was like, oh, this is the same shirt that he was wearing when he first went to see Adam he's like been dead ever since. And Adam was kind of like fantasizing what the relationship between him could have been if he had like pursued it.
In contrast, though, I had accepted he was alive. So I thought he had killed himself while Adam was gone.
Oh.
So
that'd be
my thought was like he
horrible.
had just, they had have this like relationship and he was like finally like healing and making a strong connection. And his mom had said in the previous scene, which is actually an important line, like, take care of that boy. He needs your help, or he's something like that. Like, he needs you more than you think.
Yeah. He's like beautiful, but I've never seen like a man
Look so
scared. Scared
scared.
and sad or
Yeah.
something like that.
And so it seemed like she was saying, go love him and have this life, which is not really what she was saying. She was saying he needs help moving on to the afterlife or whatever, but whatever. We can come back to that. So I was extremely angry because I thought like he was returning home with having learned the message of like love and acceptance from his parents, or what, an acceptance of death and all that, only to be thrown right back into the cycle of grief all over again. So anyhow.
Yeah. And which, I mean, he kind of is thrown back into grief all over again,
Immediately.
just immediately. But then I think if you like look at this more like metaphorically as like, if Harry's just like a singular representation of all his like past romantic relationships, all summarized within Harry. Cause then
He finds Harry's body.
and then so I was furious. I was like so mad if like this fucking movie, like to have us go through all of this and like we don't get to see him like get closure with Harry. That really like infuriated me. But then when he leaves the bedroom and Harry appears, then I was like, okay.
Yes, Harry
just look at
comes,
it.
Ghost Harry comes back out, which made me instantly, same. I felt instant relief. Like,
Yeah.
okay, this isn't going to end with just death alone,
Yeah.
even though it is death. That's the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
It's still like a little bit different.
I think my real fear with that happening is like the credits were gonna
Yeah.
roll soon and be like, what the fuck?
I thought
What
it was
the
going to like
fuck?
him leaving the apartment, going out into the city, and I was going to be like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was just like just enough narrative surprise and emotional payoff to really work. But then, so basically what ends up happening is what his mom was saying to him was like, this boy needs help accepting that he has died. And Adam actually quotes the song, The Power of Love, and he says like, I'll keep the vampires from your door or something like that.
Because Harry had said that earlier when they
Mm-hmm.
first met. He said something about vampires. I was like, what?
I was confused too. Oh, because that's when he turns up at the door, he says, I'm not a vampire. So he makes a joke about being a vampire and quotes that song or whatever. And so then he just kind of like, they don't really talk about how he's dead, but he's, I wish I could remember their exact conversation in the end, but it's sort of like an idea that he's not going to be alone. They're going to kind of like be together in this final moment and he's not going to be lonely. And so it ends with them kind of like curled up in bed together.
And then this really beautiful shot where like the room is becoming smaller as like the camera's like up in the air and like all of a sudden the room vignettes around them. And then like slowly like The Power of Love starts playing by Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And as like they're becoming smaller and smaller in the distance and the like everything around becomes like darker and darker and darker, Harry and Adam fade into a star. And then all these stars like appear over the screen.
And the song is saying like, choose love.
The most like beautiful lines of the song is like how it says make love your goal.
Yeah.
Which is like that specific like line of lyric like really stood out to me. It's sad, but feels really hopeful at the same time.
Yeah.
Like they fade into a star and like all these stars together in the sky, and kind of made me reflect on like what the title All of Us Strangers means. And
Like, we're all strangers, we're supposed to love each other anyway, is
Yeah.
kind of my takeaway.
and then even just like how the whole idea is beautiful and well done.
I agree.
And then the credits roll.
And then I felt stunned and heavy, and I left the theater and I walked down the Burbank theater steps, and these two men approached me and they said, you just saw All of Us Strangers, didn't you? I was like, I guess my face must express the extreme emotions I'm feeling at the moment. And I was like, yes. And they're like, well, did you know Andrew Scott was apparently in the movie theater? And I was like, what? And so my friend and I ran back up the stairs because we want to see if he's like in the lobby. We don't see him. And then a couple days later, I read on Twitter that earlier in the day, he had been giving a formal Q&A at the Burbank Theater. But I'm just a little confused why these people thought Andrew Scott was in the theater and why they knew I had seen the movie.
AMC Burbank 16 is a magical place. It's close to all the studios, so you just never know who's going to show up there. Yeah, it's an exciting place.
It is.
I did listen to one podcast, The Big Picture, and he interviewed Andrew Scott, and he like talked about like reading the script. It was really interesting because Andrew felt like a deep connection just like in terms of his own experience and identity reading the script. And I think I don't know if it was in the script if the songs were mentioned, but like he knew, like he was aware while filming it, the song The Power of Love would be on the soundtrack. So like he had that song in mind as he was like acting it. So I
That's
think
beautiful.
and to kind of have that in the back of his mind. He talks about Paul's like one of his closest friends.
They seem like really great friends.
They do,
now.
yeah.
I've watched like every single interview they've given, and they're very charming, and I could watch them all day long.
Yeah.
But also quickly, just we didn't say this, and I feel like in case you want everything spoiled, the idea is that Harry, the first night when he shows up with the alcohol bottle and the shirt and asks to come inside, when Adam says no, he goes back and either drinks too much or something like that happens and he passes away. Whether it was intentional or accidental, it's hard to say. So that he's been dead since that moment. And then, of course, there's also like, it's open question whether Adam's character possibly is also dead. It seems like there's like the hint there's like a fire in the beginning. And I don't know. I feel like his mom says something to him like, you're still here. And that is why because that was so moving. They were like, we're so proud of you. And he's kind of like, why I haven't done anything. You know what I mean? And then she says like, yeah, but despite everything, like you're still living, you're still here. So I think he's alive, but for sure it's open to interpretation.
I chose to believe that like Adam is alive through all this because the parents and Harry I feel like are representations of Adam's emotional journey through life. But it's a very good movie. I think one of the segments that we're trying on this podcast is asking whether is it queer or not, which I don't know how.
This one's really queer.
It's very queer.
This one's about the queer experience.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
And about grief and love, which is universal human experience because we are all humans.
Yeah.
But this is also about queerness.
Yeah. Does it seem like queer stories between men end in tragedy?
I mean, I think that's actually, it's unfortunate, bury your gays trope. The Hays Code was a motion picture set of industry guidelines for censorship of content from 1934 to 1968. And I believe part of the code was like, there can't be any depiction of like deviant behavior unless it's like, I don't want to say unless they get their comeuppance. It wasn't described like that, but the idea was like they couldn't be seen as glorifying any like deviant behavior. And so as a result, if there were any queer storylines in films at this time, it would end in someone dying. Yeah, unfortunately, that kind of carried over culturally where I think a lot of queer stories, men and women, it ends with like the heroic queer person who dies at the end, or like even Killing Eve is an example of this. People are more aware of it now, but this just happened where the final season, Sandra Oh's character and Jodie Comer's character actually do have a relationship. And then in the end, like Jodie Comer's character gets killed very like dramatically. And people were like, oh man, not the bury your gays thing again.
Interesting. So it's not limited to gender.
I don't think so.
Well, any other thoughts? Anything else you want to share?
I mean, this is just like totally my kind of movie in that I love a good ghost story. I love stuff about childhood pain.
Yeah. So
And I love surreal storytelling. I love queer movies. I really like this movie.
And I love looking at beautiful people.
A lot of people were really beautiful.
Everyone in that movie is beautiful.
It's true. There weren't that many characters, so it was, not that hard to achieve, but still impressive.
Yeah, great movie. Go see it. And how do we get out of here?
We're gonna go. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.